Hello and welcome back to Voyage of a Time Wanderer. Today I want to talk about the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society and The Last Christmas in Paris. So I've seen a lot of this style of video on Booktube and Book Talk. I think the first ones that I saw might have been from Peace Love Books or a Book Olive, but I'm not really sure. I've seen so many of this style of compilation where someone recommends, if you liked this book, you should definitely read that book. So originally I was going to save up a number of my ideas and do kind of a longer compilation video of this style, but I recently read Last Christmas in Paris and it matched so well to the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, and because it kind of has a Christmas angle, I thought I may as well just do a shorter video just comparing these two books that I think a lot of people would really enjoy, especially around this time of year. So the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society is definitely, I think, a fairly well-known book, especially here on Booktube. It was written by Shaffer and Annie Barrows. I think this is a favorite for a lot of people. I know I definitely really enjoyed it when I read it for the first time. It's set just after World War II in 1946, and our main character Juliet receives a letter out of the blue from a man who lives on the Isle of Guernsey, and he found her name written on the inside of a used book that he found at a secondhand bookstore, and he's writing to her to try to find out if she has any more books by this particular author or if she'd be willing to track some down and send them to him. Guernsey was occupied by the Nazis during the Second World War, so the island, just a year after the end of the war, is still kind of coming out of occupation and has had very limited access to resources and the outside world for the past 5 years. Juliet is a writer who is struggling to come up with an idea for a compelling story, so as she exchanges letters with this man, she finds out more about the experience of the inhabitants of Guernsey under Nazi occupation, and particularly this man and his group of friends who had set up kind of a clandestine book club to hide the fact that they were eating food that they should have turned over to the Nazis and listening to the radio. So she thinks that this would make a really great story, so she ends up exchanging letters with many of the inhabitants of the island and the participants in this Literary Potato Peel Pie Society in particular, and eventually she decides she has to go to Guernsey to learn more about these people for herself and collect ideas for her story. So that's kind of the premise of the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. It has over 673,900 reviews on Goodreads, so it's definitely a well-known book and I think fairly universally loved. And so the book that I want to compare it to is Last Christmas at Paris by Heather Webb and Hazel Gaynor. And this book only has about 12,200 reviews on Goodreads, so it's definitely much less well known. I think possibly criminally underrated, because I definitely enjoyed it just as much as the Guernsey Literary Potato Peel Pie Society. In Last Christmas in Paris, our main character Evie comes from a well-to-do English family. Her brother and his childhood best friend enlist right at the beginning of the war, and together with a third friend Alice, they make a pact to meet together to celebrate Christmas in Paris, because for sure the war will be over by Christmas. Of course, as we now know, the war didn't end quite as quickly as everyone had hoped, and so this book is essentially a chronicle of the letters that Evie exchanged with people, including her brother, Thomas the best friend, Alice, and Evie's parents at times, over the course of the entire war. So it's separated out into kind of sections for each year, 1914, 1915, 1916, 1917, 1918, and in between each of the year's letter sections there is a forward flash into I think the 1960s, when an elderly Thomas is returned to Paris to celebrate one last Christmas there. So that's really the basic summary of the two books, but what I really want to focus on is the similarities between these books and why I think that people who really enjoyed one would definitely enjoy the other. So the first similarity is that they are both epistolary novels, so they are both written as a collection of letters. I believe Guernsey is entirely written in letters, and then Last Christmas in Paris, the only section that isn't in letter format is those brief forward flash sections to the 1960s, which are not in letter format. I think epistolary novels have such a unique way of pulling you into the story and really making you feel like you are reading these letters alongside the characters, and It's kind of a different way of experiencing a story because you're not in the action directly as it happens, but you are hearing how someone else is telling what has happened to another person. So it's just kind of a unique storytelling method that isn't super common in books. I definitely have read other epistolary novels, but it's certainly not as common as just a typical prose novel. So if you enjoyed the epistolary style of Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, I think you would definitely enjoy the epistolary nature of Last Christmas in Paris. The second similarity is that they are both written by a two-author duo. This wasn't one of the main similarities that jumped out at me, but when I was writing up some notes for this video, I realized that yes, they are both written by two-author duos, which is kind of unique. Most books have one author, so I'm not sure why both of them ended up being written by two authors, or kind of how the collaboration works. I'm really curious to go and try to find some author interviews or something to see if there's anything particularly about the epistolary format that lends itself to a two-author team. Like, I'm wondering if one side writes one person's letters and the other side writes the other person's letters, and that's why maybe epistolary novels are more likely to have a two-author team writing them, or if it's just a coincidence that both of these books were written by two authors. But that's another one of the main similarities that I found between these two books. The third similarity is that they are both dealing with the effects of war on people. Obviously, Last Christmas in Paris is dealing with the First World War, and the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society is dealing with the Second World War, but they both contain descriptions of what it was like, particularly for civilians during these major global conflicts, and how ordinary people were affected by the war. So if you enjoy reading books about war and are looking particularly for books that have a perspective that goes beyond just the frontline fighting, both of these books have characters who are on the home front and still dealing with the effects of war. The fourth similarity is that both of these books have romantic relationships and kind of a love triangle as one of the main plot points. So if you enjoy having some romance in the books you read and kind of the angst of will they, won't they, wondering who the main character is going to choose and who they're going to end up with, I think you'd enjoy both of these books for that reason. Then the fifth similarity has to do with the format that I read these books in. So both of these books have a multicast audiobook, meaning that each character who writes letters has their own narrator. As you know, I have done a whole video on multicast audiobooks, which I will link in the cards, and I love this format for audiobooks. I find it so immersive and really brings the characters alive in a way that a single narrator can't, no matter how talented they are. So both of these books do have a multicast set of narrators for their audiobooks, so if you're wanting to pick up one or both of these books, I would highly recommend listening to them on audio. The narrators do a fantastic job, and it really feels like you are listening to these characters reading out loud the letters they've written. Then the sixth similarity is one that I think hit especially hard given our experiences in the world over the past 2 years, and that is that both books really deal with how humanity deals with difficult circumstances. In the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, well, we aren't dealing with people who were directly involved in the fighting. We are hearing from people who survived Nazi occupation and the many challenges that that brought. They were totally cut off from the rest of England and couldn't pass word on to any friends and family members that didn't live in Guernsey. They had no access to reliable news, reliable food supplies, nothing. So you definitely see their resilience in surviving occupation. And then in Last Christmas in Paris, we have kind of more of a frontline view into fighting in the trenches, because one of our main characters, Thomas, is a soldier for the duration of the war. So we see him dealing with particularly the mental health impacts of the trauma of war. And then we also see Evie just really struggling with, like, why did this happen to us? How long is this gonna last? How can I even see any good in this world? So I think really both of these books at their core grapple with how humanity can survive through the darkest of times, and I guess kind of the resilience of the human spirit. Similarity number 7 is that both of our main female characters are writers and have, I guess, literary ambitions. In the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, Juliet is an author and kind of struggling with writer's block at the beginning of the book. And in Last Christmas in Paris, Evie has dreams of becoming an author and is, I guess, struggling to make that dream a reality during the wartime and trying to figure out how she can find a place in this world as a young woman in the early 1900s. And she ends up working for a local paper doing kind of reports from the home front. And then on a similar note, the eighth similarity that I think would attract readers of one book to the other book is that both of these books have literary references woven throughout them. Obviously in the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, the whole kind of plot hinges around finding this name in a secondhand book. So we are immediately drawn into references of this author Charles Lamb and what the two main characters find so compelling about his writing. And then we have the book club that started on Guernsey and what books they are reading kind of throughout the war as a front for their other quasi-resistance activities. And then in Last Christmas in Paris, Evie and Thomas are both what I would consider literary souls. So they are frequently referencing poetry like Keats and Shakespeare, quoting lines to each other, discussing various favorite authors. She sends Thomas different books that are favorites of his to keep him company at the front. So there's tons of references to authors and books woven throughout the story in Last Christmas in Paris. So I think that's a really fun thing that us as book lovers tend to enjoy in books that we read, is having those references to other authors or books that we might know of or might be intrigued to check out. And then lastly, the ninth similarity is that these were both 5-star reads for me, so I can't recommend them highly enough. If you tend to have similar reading tastes as me, or if you've read one of these books already and really enjoyed it, I think you would definitely enjoy the other one. So now that I've talked about all the similarities that make these two books such a fantastic pairing, I wanted to talk about two main differences that I observed. I think Last Christmas in Paris definitely has a sadder tone than the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. Like I mentioned earlier, it deals more directly with the events of war, so I think there was more hard-hitting passages in that book that kind of were sobering and really brought home how difficult it was to live through these experiences. We see firsthand soldiers that are suffering from shell shock. We have characters that are working as nurses and ambulance drivers, so we're hearing, I think, kind of more of the realities of war, whereas in the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, it's both set after the war, so we're a little bit removed from those events, and then although we're dealing with characters who were occupied under the Nazi regime, they weren't kind of at the front lines of the battlefield, so there wasn't, I guess, those more gruesome elements of war discussed in that book. So if you're looking for a book that is not quite as bittersweet, the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society is probably the book for you. But if you're willing to have some sadness along with the happy moments, I think Last Christmas in Paris is still well worth a read. And then lastly, has to do with the scope of the characters. The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society has a larger cast of characters that we hear from more frequently. So because Juliet is writing to many people on the island, we're hearing the story from a variety of perspectives. And while there are obviously the two main characters that we're focusing on, we have kind of a wider cast of characters that we hear from, whereas Last Christmas in Paris is primarily the letters between Evie and Thomas. We do have letters from other characters. We have a few letters from her brother, her parents, the friend Alice, and then a few other characters kind of interspersed between, but primarily it is really about the letters exchanged between Evie and Thomas. So that's really one of the other differences, is I think just in the scope of how well you get to know the characters. In Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, you kind of feel like you end up knowing everyone on the island by the end of the book, whereas in Last Christmas in Paris, you know Evie and Thomas deeply and intimately, and you've heard from some of their friends and acquaintances, but really at its core, it's about developing the relationship between those two characters. So that is my if you liked this, you should read that for the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society and Last Christmas in Paris. These are both fantastic books that I hope you will pick up. If you've read The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society and really enjoyed it and are wondering what your next read should be, or are looking for a book that has a lot of similarities and will kind of give you similar vibes, I can't recommend Last Christmas in Paris enough. Thanks for watching, and until next time, enjoy wandering through the pages of a good book. Bye.